Good day, grade 10. Mrs. Valias here, your science teacher. In this video, I will give you a run-through of the contents of the module for Science 10 for week number 2. What is the title of the module for week number 2? It is entitled Plate Tectonics, Distribution of Earthquake Epicenter. Now, what is an earthquake? We all have experienced earthquakes. So according to the module, the earthquake is a weak, hinay, to violent, kusog, na shaking of the ground produced by the sudden movement of rock materials below the Earth's surface. It originates in a tectonic plate boundary. During the module number 1 in science, week 1 module, we have already learned what is a tectonic plate. It is segments of lithosphere. Diba, we have learned that the upper layer of the earth called the crust, niya na siya'y sumpay sa ubos nga pinaka-upper portion sa mantle, the second layer of the earth. Together, they are collectively called the lithosphere. Ang lithosphere of the round earth, they are like the shell of an egg, pero buak-buak. The segments, we call them as tectonic plates. Ang edge of the segment, ang nasa yang kilid or nasa yang tumoy, gitawag na og boundary. So, ang mga segments, nagkasumpay-sumpay, kana ilang connection diha, we call those boundary. Why does the boundary produce earthquake? Nganong na may tectonic plate boundary nga movement? Tungod kay all boundaries, they move slowly. In a year, they move by centimeters. So because of their movement, there will be tension between the plate boundaries and the rock materials. They will slide past each other, they will converge, they will diverge, and their movements will cause earthquake. The point inside or below the earth where the earthquake originates, we call it as the focus. The focus has another name aside from FOCUS. It is also called sometimes as the hypocenter. Directly above the hypocenter, on the ground that we are actually stepping on, ang babaw gyud ana niya, it is called the epicenter. Kanang naa gyud sa surface of the earth. So, if you look at this picture, naay gitawag na to og fault line, fault. So, kana siya, mao na siya ang boundary between two plates. Let's say this is one plate, and kanisad siya, this is another plate. Nagsikit silang duha. They are moving at different rates, both of the tectonic plates. Their movement causes the shaking of the ground here. At the point below the ground where the shaking originates, this is the focus, or another term for the focus, hypocenter. Directly above the focus or directly above the hypocenter, nasa surface, kaning matamakan na to sa babaw, dere. Directly above that, that is the point called the epicenter. So, this is the source of the earthquake, say epicenter. The world's greatest earthquake belt, called the Circum-Pacific Seismic Belt, is found along the rim of the Pacific Ocean, where about 81% of all of the planet's largest earthquake occurs. It has earned itself a nickname, the Ring of Fire. And sadly enough, the Philippines is on the edge of the Ring of Fire. Nagatubang man ta sa Pacific Ocean. We belong to the Ring of Fire. Why do a lot of earthquakes originate from this region? Well, you will discover once you will run through this module. Then you will answer the pre-test. So there are two parts of the pre-test. The part A, you will just simply write fact or fallacy. If the statement is true, you will write the word F-A-C-T. If it is a fact or true, you will write it as F-A-C-T. If it is not true, if it is false, you will write the word fallacy, F-A-L-L-A-C-Y. There are 5 sentences there. Then the next part of the pretest is the multiple choice questions. There are 5 items to answer there. Review before you are going to answer the activities. There are 3 activities for this module. Review. It is common knowledge that our country, the Philippines, lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, which causes the country to have frequent seismic and volcanic activity. Earthquakes of smaller magnitude occur regularly due to the meeting of major tectonic plates. In the previous activity, you already learned how to determine the epicenter of an earthquake using what we call as the triangulation method. Seismologists use the difference in the arrival time between P waves or primary waves and S waves or secondary waves to calculate the distance between the earthquake source and the recording instrument called the seismograph. The instrument that records earthquake is a seismograph. The reading is called a seismogram. At least 3 recording stations are needed to accurately locate the depth and magnitude of an earthquake. So these 3 recording stations, this method of using the recordings of 3 seismic stations is called the triangulation method. What are the activities for this module? Activity 1 is entitled Let's Compare. You are given 2 pictures. They are maps. The first map is called the map of plate boundaries, and the second map is called the map of earthquake distribution. You will analyze both maps and you will answer succeeding questions after each analysis of the map. So this is the first map that is given. So this is the map of the plate boundaries. So nada yung questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. What are the major plates in figure 1, map of plate boundaries? Inyo naman yung na-answer pagka week 1. So sisiyo na lang na ninyo. Number 2, what does the crooked line surrounding each plate indicate? Unsa daw meaning aning kaning mga baga diri nga line? Kani nganong na magyud siya yung mga line diri nga nag-separate, nganong gi-separate man ni sila, unsa man ni siya, what does this mean? So mo ni siya iyang edge, mo ni iyang tumoy. So ganito atong term kung edge or tumoy siya, it is called the question number 3. Which part of the plate boundary map will earthquake most likely to occur? Asa man ka nga part sa boundary map kasagaran na ay earthquake? Is it along the boundaries, ari gyud sa mga kilid-kilid diri sa boundary? Is it inside the plates? Or is it just anywhere? Asa man siya, ma'am? Question number 4. In what plate does our country belong to? Unsa ganito ang tectonic plate nga gibilongan sa Philippines? According to the map, dara ang Philippines ay. Dara diri si Luzon, Palawan na diha. Na diri si Visayas, na diri si Mindanao. Nya kani siya mo ni gitawag nato si Philippine plate. Kaning yellow si Pacific plate. Nya kaning green gitawag ni nato siya og Eurasian plate. So asa man ni belong si Philippines? Kindly write the name of the tectonic plate where we belong to. The second map that you're going to analyze is a map of earthquake distribution. So according to the map there, nasa mga dots, na green, nasa red nga dots. Then there are questions that follow. Next, first question, what do the dots represent? So unsa gani ni siya? Map of earthquake. So unsa may gi-represent aning mga dot-dot diri? Unsa ilang gi-represent? See? Kamoy mo suwat ana. Question number 2, where can we find the earthquake epicenters? Asa man kasagaran makit-an ang earthquake epicenters? When you look at the dots, tanawa ko ning mga dots diha. Kani. Unsa may gi-resemble ani niya? Naba ni siya gi-resemble? Mura man ni siya usa ka plate, ma'am. Kani sad siya diri, ma'am. Naagid siya sa kilid gid sa kuan, ma'am. Kani sad mura sad ni siya usa ka plate diri, ma'am. Nya akong nabantayan, ma'am, nga murag nalagi sa edge or sa boundary lagi sa plate. O kanisad siya diri, ma'am? Napod ni siya diri. Do you have that same observation? Next, naday pangutana, what's the difference between the two maps? Si map number 1, katong map of plate boundaries, ug si map number 2, katong kaning map of earthquake boundaries. Unsa ilahang kalainan? This is an application found on the web, and it has this address. It's quite lengthy. So this is an HTML application. Unsa may bot ipasabot ani nga application? It simply shows us the map of the world. So kani siya nga map nga inyong makita. This is the map of the world. Notice the Philippines is right over there. The green colored ones are the continents and the brown ones are the oceans. So, unsa ni siya? This is manipulative. Meaning, kung ato na i-click si zoom in, pwede ta makapadako. Move. Makita na to siya. This is realistic map of the world. Next, na siya tulo ka pilianan. Pwede na to tanawon kung according to this map, asa ang mga plate boundaries. Kung ato ni siyang i-click, makita ninyo sa mga lines, unsa ang mga subdivisions of the plate boundaries. So, kani nga continent sa babaw, kani siya, this is the North American plate. Kani si South American plate. Kani si African plate. Kay mao ni ang area ni South Africa. Kani sa babaw, dako kaayo, this is the Eurasian plate. O mabantayan ninyo, na part sa Philippines that belongs to the Eurasian plate. Nasa part nga na belong ta sa Philippine plate. Because this is the Philippine plate. And this is the Eurasian plate. Europe, Asian plate. Then tapad diha, kani siya, partly big part of the Pacific Ocean. Sumpay dayon siya dira, kani Pacific Ocean. So, mao na siya ang mga plate boundaries. Sunod, asa day dapit makita ang mga active volcano sa kalibutan. So, kung ato na siyang i-click diri, kanang yellow diha nga mga triangle, mao na sila yung mga location kung asa makita ang mga active volcanoes. Notice, unsa inyong nabantayan, kasagaran sa mga active volcanoes, kay naman dyan mga ning simang, naasad siya makitaan along the plate boundaries. Kung asa na ay plate boundary, naasad siya daghan dihang mga volcano. Look at the Philippines. Here is the Philippines. Naaman to sa plate boundary between the Europe, Asia, nya kani mao man ang boundary ang plate sa Australia. Nya kani the Philippine plate, daghan diha kaayo bulkan. Dara, ani gitawag ni diri nga area as the Pacific Ring of Fire. It has the most number of earthquakes. 81% of earthquakes originate from the Pacific Ring of Fire, and it has the most number of volcanoes. Next, kung ato ning pislito ni diring pilianan nga earthquakes, ato dayong makita kung asa kasagaran na hitabo ang mga earthquakes sa kalibutan. Terang, what can you see? The red dots are all earthquake epicenters. So, unsa inyong mga mabantayan? Hala, ma'am, basta boundary lagi siya, ma'am, no? Nasa diha ang mga earthquakes na hitabo. Kani, tanang na ay red nga dot diha. Notice, baga kaayo ang mga red diri dapit sa Pacific Ring of Fire. Kani diri sa Eurasian plate na diri dapita ang mga kuan. Kung asa kasagaran ang boundary or utlanan sa mga plates, naasa didto ang mga earthquake na hitabo. Naasa didto makita kasagarang volcano. What does this tell you? This tells us that where plate boundaries are located, along the edges of plate boundaries
Volcanoes can also be found, and most earthquakes also happen.
Now you will answer activity number 2. Let's mark the boundaries. But before that, you will be able to read a discussion part in your module. So the maps, figure 1 and figure 2, they show the type of data that help geologists understand where and why most earthquakes occur. Scientists use these patterns of past Earth movements to give the most reliable clues to future quakes. So mao na to, naibawaan na ninyo daan. The 7 major plates are the African plate, Antarctic plate, Eurasian plate, Indo-Australian plate, the North American plate, the Pacific plate, and the South American plate. And then figure 2, it shows the earthquake distributions around the world. The places on Earth where most earthquakes originate mark the boundaries of the lithospheric plates. Again, each plate is slowly moving relative to each other, causing geologic events such as earthquakes to happen. Activity number 2, let's mark the boundaries. So based on the map, nadayoy pangutana, how are earthquakes distributed on the map? Where are they located? Which places do not experience earthquakes? Why do you think it is important for us to identify the areas which are prone to earthquakes? Then there's a discussion part. The world's earthquakes are not randomly distributed. Dili random, dili katag, dili scattered ang mga earthquake sa kalibutan. Nganuman, they tend to be concentrated in narrow zones. Naragi specific locations around the world nga antura jud kasagaran mahitabo ang earthquake. And we know now that these earthquakes usually happen at the edges of continents. Kay nga naman, kasagaran, basta nasa edge, nasa kilid, kasagaran na siya, edge na siya sa boundary, plate boundary. Some are in mid-continents while others are in oceans. But not all edges of continents. Dili tanang edge sa continents, mid-continents or oceans can be places where earthquake occurs. Asa raman gyud siya kasagaran ang mga prone to earthquakes. Mahitabo ra ning mga prone to earthquakes kung naa siya sa boundary sa tectonic plate. Remember that. Next, activity number 3. It is entitled Whose Fault? So identify the active faults in the Philippines. So there you are given a map of the Philippines with the faults na legend dira asa makita ng trenches. Unsa nang trench? T-R-E-N-C-H. Trench, kantil. Kana ganing dagat na nga, nakalit lang siya kaubos, or siya cliff niya, tubig. That's the kantil. Trench. Notice that the kilid, both sides of the Philippines has a trench. Kaning symbol. Trench. So naa siya trench. And know this, that the deepest trench in the world is located on the edge of the Philippine plate. Kanang gitawag na to og Marianas Trench. Pinakalawom nga kantil sa tibuok kalibutan. Na siya sa ilawom sa dagat nya, mukalit lang siya og ka-deep kantil. Then there are questions that you need to answer. What is a fault? What are the most active fault lines in the Philippines? What's the biggest fault line in the Philippines? What fault line is nearest to Cebu? And why is the Philippines host to many active faults? Then there is a discussion. Kaning mga map na discover ni because of the Philippine fault system. It's a major interrelated system of geologic faults throughout the whole of the Philippine archipelago. It is primarily caused by the tectonic forces compressing the Philippines into what geophysicists call as the Philippine Mobile Plate. There are 5 active fault lines in the country called the West Philippine Fault, the East Philippine Fault, the South of Mindanao Fault, the Central Philippine Fault, and the Marikina Valley Fault System. According to PHIVOX, Marikina Valley Fault Line is the most geologically active fault line of the 5 major fault lines in the Philippines. So as mentioned earlier, the Philippines lies in the Pacific Ring of Fire, home of several tectonic plate boundaries. There are 3 tectonic plates encircling the Philippines. The Philippine plate on our east, the Eurasian plate on our west, and the Indo-Australian plate on our south. So daghan kayong plate boundaries nga nag-surround the Philippines. That is why daghan kayo og volcanoes around the Philippines, daghan kayo og tectonic movements causing earthquakes around the Philippines. After you're done answering activity 1, 2, and 3, you will now be reading the generalization. There are 3 sentences for the generalization in module number 2. First, plates are large pieces of upper few kilometers 100 kilometers of earth that move as a single unit as it floats above the mantle. The plates are in constant motion. They interact along their margins or their boundaries where important geological processes take place, and also this is one of the major areas of the occurrence of earthquakes. And earthquakes are concentrated near plate boundaries or plate margins. When there is a when a plate is a populated area, earthquake is most likely to be a damaging one. Ngano man kung populated ng area, daghan dihang magpatukod o mga buildings, mga infrastructure. Kung mulihok na ang yuta, mga guba ang infrastructure, so damage is done. Mas dako ang damage. Then after that, you will be at the end of the module, you will answer the application, the post-test, and the additional activity. And that ends activity or the module for week number 2 in science. See you again in future videos. Thank you.